Hello YouTube, welcome to another episode of the Card Combo Show with me, Chocobilly, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. This week I'm going to be focusing on cards from the world of Ivalice, or however you want to say it, and there's a bit of contention about what the world of Ivalice is. I'm going to call it Ivalice, because it spans quite a few games, not all of them Final Fantasy, and some are like a dream world, some are actually part of the same world, so Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy 12 for example. But yeah, so any Final Fantasy games including Ivalice are Final Fantasy Tactics, Tactics Advance, Tactics Advance 2, and Final Fantasy 12. There is also, or 12 Revenant Wings as well, there is Vagrant Story, I believe is a game that isn't Final Fantasy, very similar to Final Fantasy, very similar to Final Fantasy Tactics, but it features in the world of Ivalice, but not under the Final Fantasy banner. Anyway, sorry, rambling. This week I'm going to be looking at Time Mage from Opus 14, Ashe from Opus 10, Moogle Knight from Opus 8, Orator from Opus 5, and Luso from Opus 14. Right, so Time Mage, 4 CP, 8k, ice. Forward, pretty simple. When active, Time Mage becomes dull, choose one forward, dull it. There was a bit of confusion about this card when it came out because people weren't sure if it was referring to all Time Mages. It's not. It's referring to itself. So basically, when this dude becomes dull for any reason, you get to choose a forward, dull it. So that means that if he becomes dull from your opponent's snow, you get to dull something else. If you attack with him, you get to dull something else. If you dull him from your own ability, you get to dull something else. So, you know, you can just kind of run with it a bit. So combining it with something like Puppet Master, also from Opus 14, so dull 2 active forwards, choose one forward, dull it. You can only use this ability once per turn. So let's say hypothetically you had 2 Time Mages on the field, you could dull both of them to use Puppet Master's ability, which would also dull something, so you'd actually get to dull 3 things from dulling 2 Time Mages. Okay, Hope. So when an active character your opponent controls becomes dull due to your summons or abilities, freeze it. So it's just a nice way to be able to capitalize on dulling something out and freezing it at the same time. I mean, Hope applies to pretty much any ice card that dulls something, you might as well put them in there. But Time Mage, combined with the likes of Puppet Master and whatnot, it means that you can just really lock down your opponent's field. Then we've got Arithmetician. So dull, select one number, dull all the forwards of that cost. You can only use this ability during your turn. So Arithmetician obviously affects your field as well, but what you can do is if you dull Arithmetician and say 4, that will then dull your own Time Mage. If you've got a couple of Time Mages, that then means you get to dull 2 additional forwards of any number on your opponent's field. Now this does suck because obviously you're dulling Arithmetician, which means that that's another forward you control that's gone dull, and then Time Mage as well. So you need to use it in a case where it's really going to be benefiting you, so maybe you have a way of dulling all these forwards and then reactivating them to then go swinging, or maybe you're just using these alongside something like Hope where you're able to just really lock down your opponent's forwards. And then you got Carla. Dull and dull one active forward. Choose one attacking forward, it gains plus 1000 power until the end of the turn. Ice Fire work well together. You get to dull Carla and dull Time Mage. You then get to dull something out of the way and also buff a forward you control. March. Dull one active forward. Choose one forward blocking March. Deal it damage equal to the power of the dull forwards. It means that your opponent's going to lose ways to be able to block because you're attacking with March. They're not going to want to block it. But if they do so, you get to dull Time Mage effectively, deal 8k to that blocking forward, and then also dull something else out of the way. And this is funny because they can obviously choose not to block it, but then when you attack with Time Mage will then dull something anyway, so they have to consider whether or not they actually want to take that 8k on the chin or not. And then Titan, choose one forward you control, dull it, it cannot be broken this turn. So I mean, you're getting to dull Time Mage, it gains the protection from Titan, and you also get to dull something in your opponent's field. So maybe your opponent's got a couple of forwards they can attack with, you block with Time Mage, you then cast Titan on Time Mage, who then won't break from the block, and then you get to dull something on your opponent's forwards as well. Machinist. When Machinist enters the field, choose up to 2 forwards. Until the end of the turn, they gain dull, choose 1 forward, deal it 4000 damage. So if you've got a couple of forwards that are able to use action abilities, maybe you've got 2 Time Mages, you can play Machinist, choose your 2 Time Mages, you can dull those 2 Time Mages to deal 4k to 2 different forwards or 8k to 1 forward, and then also dull out 2 other forwards. Alright, Ashe, a very good card. A 4 CP 8k water from Opus 10. At the beginning of the attack phase during each of your turns, select 2 of the 4 following actions. Draw 1 card, then discard 1 card from your hand. All the water forwards you control gain 1000 power until the end of the turn. Choose 1 character, activate it, or choose 1 forward of cost 4 or less. It loses all its abilities until the end of the turn. So you get to choose 2 of those 4, and all of them are generally pretty good. So, Hope, again, if you get to choose one forward, one character and activate it with Hope on the field, that means you get to activate another couple of characters as well, and you know, you could just activate a backup and then you can activate forwards on monsters as well using Hope's ability. And then you've got Kane, so this is referring to Ashe's ability of choose one, choose one forward across 4 or less, it loses all its abilities still in the turn, so it means that if Kane does die, he doesn't have to go back onto your opponent's field, because even though he has a counter still on him, he's lost his text which stipulates that he must go back onto your opponent's field, so you're good to go. Kunshira, similar sort of thing, so basically Ashe is a good way to be able to get rid of the negative side of the forwards you control. So if you use Ashe on Kunshira and you have 5 backups, Kunshira will lose the text of if you control 4 more backups, Kunshira loses 3000 power, so Kunshira will stay a 9k forward. Queen of Eblan, again, similar sort of thing. If your opponent doesn't control any forwards, Queen of Eblan cannot attack, so now she will be able to attack. And also when Queen of Eblan forms a party, now you do have to bear in mind that, you know, Queen of Eblan won't be able to use her ability with King of Eblan, but if your opponent doesn't have any forwards, then it won't really matter, so realistically you're only going to be choosing Queen of Eblan when you can attack. Caius, when Caius is put from the field into the break zone, select one character you control, put it into the break zone. So, yep, same sort of thing. Caius can attack without fear of having to break something. Now, if you're playing Caius, the chances are you're going to have considered breaking something using Caius' ability, which will benefit you. But, you know, if it's something that you don't want to have happen on your turn, then at least you can get rid of it using Ashe's ability. Ingus. So, Dull, choose one job standard unit forward or job warrior of light forward you control until the end of the turn. It gains plus 1000 power, and Brave, you can only use his ability during your main phase. Now, you obviously have to be careful because you can Dull Ingus and then reactivate him using Ashe, and then that forward that you gave Brave can attack, and Ashe's ability only works during the attack phase, but it means that on your second attack phase, your second main phase, you can use it again to buff if you want to combine that with some other abilities. Really, you know, Ingus, Refia, Arc, and Luneth, all of them have good dull abilities which you can combine with Ashe to reactivate to then reuse their abilities again. Rydia, so Dull, choose one summon. If it deals damage to a forward this turn, the damage increases by 1000 instead, which obviously if you use Ashe to Dull Rydia again, means it increases the damage by 2000. Moogle, so again this is more just talking about the primal backups, because obviously you can use an Ice and Dull, choose one forward, Dull up, but you can only use the ability if you control an Ice or Primal. But you've also got things like Amalja or the Ixali, they've all got Dull abilities which if you use Ashe to reactivate them, you can then use them again. Ixali was a bad example because Ixali activates a forward and you could just use Ashe's ability to activate that forward, but you know what I mean, you can use those backups to be able to use something to your effect. Gestalian Empire Sid, so Dull, choose one monster you control, select one counter placed on it, and place one additional counter of the same type selected counter on that monster. So, if you played something like Realm onto the field to then play a couple of monsters, one of those monsters gains a counter from the other monstering entering, you can use Gestalian Empire Sid to then increase that counter again. You can use Ashe to reactivate Gestalian Empire Sid, and then give it another counter as well. Flandit. Dull, choose one forward opponent controls. If your opponent doesn't pay 1, it cannot attack or block this turn. Ashe can keep on reactivating Flandit, so then your forwards or your opponent's forwards start, you know, not being able to block or not being able to attack. Similar sort of thing with Spice Sicilian as well. Dull, choose one forward. It can only be blocked by a forward of cost equal to or inferior to its own this turn. Not as good a card anymore now that you've got the likes of multicolour and just general power creep as well. There's a lot of smaller forwards which are really powerful. But still, your opponent may not have some of those on the field at the time you want to use Spice Sicilian, at which point your little forward's going to sneak on under. Alright, Moogle Knight, he is a 3 CP 5k forward with Brave. If Moogle Knight is dealt damage by a forward, reduce the damage by 3000 instead. If a forward forming a party with Moogle Knight receives damage, reduce the damage by 3000 instead. So he's a nice little protection if you do want to form parties. So, Gipple. Moogle Knight will become a 10k forward, and, you know, assuming that you're forming a party with Gipple, Gipple will become huge as well, but also now the damage they receive from forwards will be reduced as well, so if they do get blocked, they're probably fine. Talking of blocking, using something like Begamnan means that if Begamnan deals damage to your opponent, your opponent must block Begamnan if possible. So Moogle Knight, Begamnan, they both party attack. The opponent must block, even if it's a 10k forward. you know, that damage is going to be reduced by 3. Now, obviously, that if they divvy all that whole 10k onto one forward, that means that obviously Moogle Knight or Beganon will die, but ultimately they can't just split the damage both ways and kill both Beganon and Moogle Knight, and ultimately you are getting rid of a big forward on your opponent's field. Sea Card, obviously Moogle Knight's got his own little damage reduction ability, but you put Sea Card in the mix as well, it now becomes minus 4k to Moogle Knight when he receives damage from a forward. Joker, Dull, Earth and Dull, sorry, choose one forward with Brave during this turn. The next damage it dealt is reduced to it by 2000 instead. So Moogle Knight, Sea Card, and Joker would mean that Moogle Knight would actually, the damage he would be dealt would be reduced by a total of 5, which is kind of, no, sorry, a total of 6. So your opponent's going to have to start dealing a lot of damage through their forwards, or just dealing a lot of damage regardless, to be able to get rid of Moogle Knight and the forwards it's partying with. Warrior of Light. So at damage 5, the job standing units forwards you control gain plus 5,000 power, so that's really good. Moogle Knight becomes very big and quite hard to kill. And then when Warrior of Light enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, play as many job standing units forwards you want with a total of cost 5 or less among them onto the field, and return the other cards to the bottom deck in any order. So being able to bring out Moogle Knight and maybe something else as well is useful, but ultimately the fact that you can have Moogle Knight there to party attack with things to make your parties harder to block, especially when you're swarming the field with lots of probably small standard units. Matthias the Corrupt. So choose one blocking forward, break it. Now chances are you're attacking Moogle Knight, your opponent's like, well, I can block with this forward, but it's going to kill Moogle Knight anyway. So I'm just going to block, and then you cast Matthias, you get to break that forward. Also works excellently with Opus 14 Cloud or Beganon. Right, Orator or Orator. 2 CP, 5k, Earth, Water, forward. Dull, choose one forward, select a job, it gains a job until the end of the turn. Quick fact, Orator, or Orator, is one of the most powerful jobs in FFT, in my opinion anyway. Mostly because if you want to play FFT and start stealing your opponent's equipment, which is something you can do in FFT, you can steal like specific parts of their armor, so you can steal their sword, or you can steal their boots or whatever. Orator actually has the ability to be able to convince your opponent's convince the enemy mobs to join your team, and then at the end of the fight you can then just take all their gear and tell them to go away. So you actually get to steal everything from them, and throughout the course of the fight, when they do join your team, you take control of them as well. So anyway, Riku, job Gullwings forwards you control cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities, so using Orator to make it so that, you know, any forward is a job Gullwings, especially with Pain on the field as well, means that they become untargetable. Duel Nabat, when Duel Nabat enters the field, select one of the 2 following actions. For each job Psycom you control, your opponent discards 1 card from his or her hand. So if you play Duel Nabat onto the field, and you also have Yargrosh, and then you can use Orator to make, you know, Orator of a job Psycom, at that point your opponent's going to have to discard 3 cards from their hand because of Duel Nabat's effect. Sahagin, when a job Water Primal enters the field, activate Sahagin, and then Dull, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put 1 card among them on top of your deck and the other bottom, on the words, and the other to the bottom of your deck. You can only use ability if you control a Water job Primal. Well, you can use Orator to make Orator a job Primal, at which point it's a Water job Primal. You can then use Sahagin, and obviously this works for any of the Primal backups, so the Moogle, the Amalja, whatever. You can make a forward of the appropriate element a job Primal, and then you can start to use these guys. Nyx, when Nyx enters the field, put 1 job Kingsglaive you control into the break zone. When you do so, choose one forward, break it. So you could use Orator to make, I don't know, a Viking a Kingsglaive, you play Nyx onto the field, and then you put that Viking into the break zone, you get to draw a card, and you get to break a forward your opponent controls. Also, when a job Kingsglaive other than Nyx you control is put from the field into the break zone, select one of the 2 following actions. Nyx gains haste until the end of the turn, choose one forward, dull it. So you actually get to either dull a forward out, or give Nyx haste as well. That's pretty good. Bran, when Bran enters the field you may search for 1 job Princess forward and add to your hand, but when a job King forward or a job Princess forward you control is put from the field into the break zone, you may pay 2 water. When you do so, choose 1 forward, return to its owner's hand. So pretty good with the new Leviathan or Bismarck, but ultimately you can use, you know, you could block with Orator, dull it to then make itself a job King or job Princess. When it does get put from the field to the break zone, you can pay the 2 water, then bounce another forward your opponent controls. Renock, so an Earth, choose 1 job Headhunter until the end of, or during this turn, sorry. The next damage it deals to a forward becomes double the damage instead. You can only use ability once per turn. So you could have Orator on the field and Renock on the field. You block with Orator, dull it to make it a job Headhunter. You then pay 1 Earth, and it will now be a 10k blocker. pretty good. And it doesn't have to be just Orator, it could be any forward. Make it into a Gel Headhunter, then pay the 1 Earth with Renock. It deals double its damage. Pretty good. Ingus, so again, similar sort of thing. Works with any of the Warrior of Light backups, Ingus, Luneth, you know, those guys. You can use their respective effect to then either give, you know, plus 1,000 Brave or plus 1,000 Haste, I think is Luneth. You know, there's other abilities that they have, but ultimately you can make any forward a standard unit or a Job Warrior of Light. You can actually use Ingus on Orator to give it plus 1,000 Brave, attack with Orator, then dull it to make another forward a Job Standard unit or Job Warrior of Light, and then use maybe Luneth or Arc or Raffia to use their abilities on them as well. And finally, Ravus. So during this turn, if a job captain you controlled has been put from the field into the break zone, the cost required to cast Ravus is reduced by 4. So if you've got a forward that you're happy to sack off, maybe you're casting Famfrit on a Viking again, use Orator to make that Viking a captain. You can then put that captain or that Viking into the break zone. Ravus then becomes a 1 CP forward, you play him onto the field, and Bob's your uncle, you've got big forward for 1 CP. Alright, finally, Luso. So a 2 CP, 3k, so very, very small EX burst forward. EX Burst, when Luso enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards from your deck, add 1 category FFTA2 character among them to your hand, and return the other cards to the bottom of the deck in any order, which itself is perfectly fine. But then engage S and 1. Reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, play 1 category FFTA2 character among them onto the field, and return the other cards to the bottom of the deck in any order. You can only use this ability during your turn, which is fine. You know, it doesn't matter at what point during your turn, you can just use it as many times as you want. As long as you've got those Luso cards in hand, go ham. And it also plays characters as well, so provided you've got the backup spaces and the character isn't already on the field, you can just keep playing backups as well. So, Kusith, yeah, being able to just cast Luso's ability to get something onto the field, use Kusith to get that Luso back to them, cast it again. Chances are you're going to be getting something worthwhile, and Kusith is only 2 CP, so realistically, you're going to be getting something good onto the field. White Mage, so when White Mage enters the field, you may pay 1 water. When you do so, draw a card. So kind of the inverse of Kusith, but you get to draw a card to hand for only 1 water. Obviously, you have to make sure you got that water open, so don't use that when you pay for Luso, but ultimately you get more cards to hand and also get some field presence as well. Yule, so an Ice and Dull, put Yule into the break zone, search for 1 forward, put it under the top card of your deck. Luso obviously reveals the top 5 cards, and then you get to play a character onto the field. If you put that nice forward that you want there, probably Iliwa, then you can just, you know, 1 Ice, Dull, Yule, and then use Luso to then play Iliwa or whatever onto the field. Leziford. Now, this is obviously one of the best cards to play it with. When Leziford enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, play 1 wind character of cost 5 or less among them onto the field, and return the other cards to the bottom of your deck in any order. Now, you need to be careful, because obviously, if you're playing Luso, you're going to have a lot of FFTA2 characters in your deck, and if you're playing Leziford, the chances are you want a lot of wind characters, but the two don't exactly align, but you can still get lucky and you could still get something quite big onto the field, and ultimately Leziford playing anything of 4 CP or more is worth it. And, you know, again, you're paying effectively 3 CP from Luso's S ability to get a backup and probably another forward onto the field. Sidda Clan Gully, so he can come onto the field, he searches a category FFTA2 forward and add it to your hand. You could actually search another Luso, at which point use Luso's S ability again, or obviously you can search Iliwa, which is what most people would do. Talking of which, Iliwa comes onto the field from Luso's ability, you then use her S ability to give all your forwards haste. Pretty good. Alright, that's a wrap for episode 53 of the Card Combo Show. I hope you guys like it. Oddly enough, I avoid a lot of Final Fantasy XII, which is probably the most famous, well, I wouldn't say it's the most famous, most infamous maybe, of the Ivalice games. And I really do love Final Fantasy XII, but I think I'm going to do a Final Fantasy XII dedicated episode, to be honest, because there's a lot of good cards I like to mess around with that category. But yeah, hope to see you guys in the next video, and be lucky.